The origins of prostitution are shrouded in the mists of time, reaching back to the very dawn of civilization. In ancient Mesopotamia, the practice was not simply a commercial transaction, but an integral part of religious rituals. Temples were home to sacred prostitutes who served the goddess Ishtar, embodying fertility and desire. These women were not stigmatized, but rather held a unique and revered position within society. Moving to ancient Greece, we see a shift in the perception of prostitution. While temple prostitution continued in some forms, dedicated spaces for sexual commerce emerged. These early precursors to the red light district were known as porneia and catered to a wide range of social classes. Prostitutes, both male and female, could be found plying their trade in these designated areas. The Romans, with their penchant for organization and control, further developed the concept of the red light district. Roman cities featured lupanars, state-sanctioned brothels that operated openly and were subject to taxation. These establishments were often quite elaborate, featuring frescoes and erotic art that adorned the walls. However, despite the seeming acceptance of prostitution in these ancient societies, it is important to note the complexities. Not all who engaged in sex work did so freely. Slavery and coercion undoubtedly played a role, highlighting the vulnerability of certain groups within these hierarchical societies. The fall of the Roman Empire ushered in a period of significant change in Europe. Christianity, with its emphasis on chastity and monogamy, gradually became the dominant religion. This had a profound impact on the perception of prostitution. Once an accepted part of society, it was now condemned as a sin. However, despite religious and moral prohibitions, prostitution did not disappear. Instead, it was pushed to the margins of society. Medieval cities, with their growing populations and limited economic opportunities for women, saw a rise in the sex trade. Brothels, often disguised as taverns or bathhouses, operated discreetly to avoid the scrutiny of authorities. The medieval period also saw the emergence of new attitudes towards prostitution. While the Church condemned it as sinful, secular authorities often adopted a more pragmatic approach. Prostitution was seen as a necessary evil, a way to regulate male desire and prevent more disruptive forms of sexual behavior. This led to a complex and often contradictory system of regulation. Prostitutes were required to wear distinctive clothing, such as striped hoods or yellow badges, to mark their profession. They were often confined to specific areas of the city, laying the groundwork for the designated red light districts that would become commonplace in later centuries. The 19th century witnessed a dramatic transformation in the landscape of prostitution, particularly in burgeoning urban centers. The Industrial Revolution, with its promise of economic opportunity, drew people from rural areas to cities, creating a new class of urban workers. Among them were women who, facing limited options and societal constraints, turned to sex work as a means of survival. This period saw the rise of the grand brothels, opulent establishments that catered to the upper echelons of society. These houses of ill repute, as they were euphemistically called, were often lavishly decorated, featuring plush furnishings, flowing champagne, and orchestrated entertainment. They offered a discreet and luxurious setting for men of means to engage in illicit liaisons. However, behind the facade of glamour and sophistication lay a darker reality. Many women who worked in these brothels were not there by choice. Poverty, coercion, and human trafficking fed the system, trapping countless women in a cycle of exploitation. The madams who ran these establishments wielded immense power, controlling every aspect of the women's lives, from their earnings to their movements. The 19th century also saw the rise of social reform movements that sought to address the plight of prostitutes. Organizations like the Salvation Army emerged, offering moral guidance and practical assistance to women seeking to escape the sex trade. These early efforts highlighted the complex interplay of social, economic and moral factors that contributed to the persistence of prostitution. The 20th century ushered in a new era of social reform and moral crusades, many of which targeted prostitution. The progressive era in the United States, for example, saw concerted efforts to eradicate vice and immorality, with red light districts squarely in the crosshairs. The Mann Act of 1910, which criminalized the transportation of women across state lines for immoral purposes, was a significant blow to the organized prostitution networks that flourished in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The crackdown on prostitution, however, did not eliminate the demand for paid sex. Instead, it drove the industry underground, making it more difficult to regulate and potentially more dangerous for those involved. Organized crime syndicates seized the opportunity, infiltrating and controlling the now clandestine world of brothels, streetwalkers, and escort services. The red light district, once a visible and often tolerated part of the urban landscape, retreated into the shadows, operating through coded language, clandestine meetings, and covert networks. The 20th century also witnessed the emergence of new perspectives on prostitution. Feminist scholars and activists began to challenge the traditional view of prostitutes as inherently immoral or as victims in need of rescue. They argued that sex work, like any other form of labor, should be recognized and regulated, ensuring the safety and autonomy of those involved. This shift in perspective contributed to ongoing debates about the legalization and decriminalization of prostitution, arguments that continue to shape the landscape of the sex trade today.